Hey there, welcome back to another review. This time it is a review of the science fiction epic, the awesome, awe-inspiring The Abyss. Now, this is a request from Austin Wilcut, who requested this review. I'm really glad he did because this review has been a long time coming for me. I am one of this film's biggest fans. I've been ever since I was a kid. This is, in my opinion, the most impressive film that James Cameron has ever directed because of everything that he had to deal with this production and how he was able to pump out a film that is so astonishing is an amazing feat. It really is. Also, I would say that this is, from a technical standpoint, without a doubt, the best underwater film ever made. I also would give this a nod over films like Leviathan and Deep Star 6 as the best underwater film ever made, period. But that's just my personal opinion. I enjoy the Leviathan a lot. I mean, I have a poster like right behind my head right here of Leviathan on my wall. But The Abyss, it will always have a special place in my heart. I grew up watching this film on DVD. Not this particular 2-disc, because I didn't get this until later. I grew up watching the single disc release. I believe it's because my mom was a big fan of the film, and she had it in her collection. And since it was not an R-rated movie, I was able to watch it whenever I wanted to, pretty much. And I did that a lot. And this film inspired me to look up and read books about undersea life and the ocean and things like that. And ever since I was a kid, I remember thinking about underwater movies and things like that. And because of The Abyss, that's why I went out and sought out films like Deep Star 6 or Leviathan. And I even wrote a short fiction story in junior high. I think it was junior high, and it might have been in elementary school, but I'm not entirely 100% sure of exactly when it was. But I wrote a underwater story based on, sort of inspired by The Abyss, but with like fish monsters, the kind of thing that you would expect from a James Cameron underwater movie, which is why Leviathan and Deep Star 6 jumped the gun, and they thought that, oh, the director of Aliens and the Terminator is doing an underwater movie. Well, that must mean that it's a monster movie. So we got to get our underwater monster movie out as soon as possible. And then The Abyss turns out to be the complete opposite. It's not even an underwater monster movie. They sure had egg on their faces, that's for sure. But those movies still worked out fine in their own way. But I remember like thinking about, what if there was a film like The Abyss, but like it did have monsters? Like, it might be even better. But I still really like The Abyss the way it is. And I also like both versions of the film. The theatrical version is one that's really grown on me over the years. I grew up watching the special edition. That's the one I chose the most. That's the one I grew up with. That's the one I watched more often. Even though I think the disc had the theatrical cut, I watched the special edition most of the time because, I don't know, I just, the idea of special edition just really spoke to me. But I've seen the theatrical cut more and more over the years, and I've really learned to appreciate it in a lot of different ways. I think the theatrical cut, at the end of the day, I actually prefer it over the special edition now. I think it's in large part because the pacing is better. It's not as slow in terms of the pacing as the special edition is. The special edition, there are some deleted scenes that were put back in that make sense, but there's other things that just kind of drag the running time down and aren't really necessary to the film. Really, they're just kind of just extra scenes. And at the end of the day, the whole subplot with the nuclear weapons and the giant wave, and the giant wave is really cool, but I'm just thinking about less is more when it comes to The Abyss. What makes The Abyss stand out when you watch the theatrical cut versus a special edition in a good way is that it doesn't have that preachy subplot. It doesn't have that whole, oh, woe is mankind. Oh, man is evil. These aliens see us with their nuclear weapons, and they think that we should be wiped out. And then they see the fact that humanity has love and compassion for one another through the relationship between Bud and Lindsay, and then they decide to save us. It's one of those things just a bit preachy and kind of Twilight Zone-y, and kind of it's been there, done that by this time. I like the fact that it's, in the theatrical cut, it's more of a simple story. There's no preachiness to it. It's just the aliens decide to do something good for the benefit of mankind, to help out a fellow living being in Bud, and to help him survive, and to save his crew. That just, it's simple, but it's effective. And I'll talk a little bit more about the special edition later in this video. So The Abyss came out in 1989, the year I was born. It came out in August. And the theatrical cut is about 145 minutes. The special edition is 171. You see what I mean? That's a pretty big difference. That's like 30-something minutes more. And it really does weigh the film down a little bit. It kind of starts to drown with the special edition. But I'm not saying the special edition is bad, though. The special edition is still really, really good. And there are different bits and pieces and different scenes that are put back in the film that actually do add to the story. But if I had to pick one to watch, I would pick the theatrical cut. And another reason why is because special edition, there is no HD version available of it. The crying shame really is the fact that The Abyss is not on Blu-ray. This is not on Blu-ray. It's not remastered. The only way you can watch this is in non-anamorphic widescreen, and that's what this disc is and what the single disc is. And that's just lame. For a film that has such visually stunning visuals. It has so many visuals in it that just make your jaw drop. It's a disservice to not have this film available in high definition. And I've heard all these different things with James Cameron and so on and so forth. It's supposed to come out on Blu-ray earlier this year. Not happening. Maybe next year. I don't know about that, especially since Disney has bought Fox. So it's one of those things where I don't know if we'll ever get a Blu-ray of this, and that's a crying shame. But that being said, there is an HD rip floating around on the net of the theatrical cut, and I saw that. It was like, wow, it was like watching a whole different film, because I was used to this non-anamorphic widescreen edition, which is pretty shitty. It doesn't do the film justice at all. I mean, it's better than nothing, but I would argue the Laserdisc I have has better quality. And the reason why is because I think this was a Laserdisc port. I think what happened is they put the Laserdisc port onto a DVD instead of like doing a whole new transfer. And no wonder it looks off. But if you watch it on the original port, like if you watch it on Laserdisc, then it looks better, because that's the way it was meant to be seen, that the edition that's on this disc. But a lot of people don't have Laserdiscs or Laserdisc players, so they're kind of shit out of luck. And The Abyss is also another film I would love to see in the theater. This is a film that is right up there near the top of my list of films I want to see in 35mm, because the immersion that you would get as an audience member watching this movie in the theater would just be unbelievable. It really would be. So, the film was directed by James Cameron, who also wrote the film. And I think he did an excellent job doing both things. He did an excellent job writing the movie. He did an excellent job directing it. This is the James Cameron that I love. This is the James Cameron that I admire. This is the James Cameron I respect, even though he's kind of an asshole on set. And because he's such a driven, OCD type of personality, he makes a lot of great films. So, I mean, these movies are great. I mean, this is a great movie. The Terminator is a great film. T2 is a great movie. True Lies is a great film. And I'm saying great over and over again because it's true. They're all great films. After Titanic, it seems like he lost his passion and his drive for making films. And he was like, I'm the king of the world. I don't need to try anymore. And the quality of his films has suffered. And it's one of those things where James Cameron at one point in time was the cream of the crop, really truly the king of the world when it comes to directing. And now he's just some rich, in my opinion, has-been director who's clinging on his name to and spending all this extra time working on innovations for special effects and camera techniques and all this other stuff, and not really bothering to regain the spark that really made him who he is today, that made it possible for him to even be a well-known name. So it's kind of bittersweet when you watch older Cameron films, because you see such a excellent visionary director, and then you look at what his output is now. I mean, stuff like Avatar and his recent stint promoting shit like Terminator Genesis, or his executive producer credit on Alita, Battle Angel Alita. But anyway, yeah, Cameron's direction in this is phenomenal. It really is. He sets up some absolutely gorgeous shots. The way that he shoots all the underwater sequences is second to none. And his writing I also thought was really excellent as well. Some really remarkable writing, because the characters are really well fleshed out. They're likable. They all have different personalities. I love the blue collar aspect of this team, this crew on the Benthic Explorer. Originally, though, I think James Cameron's original concept was to have scientists, but then he decided against that because he didn't think scientists would be as accessible to an audience as a blue collar group of workers would be. I think he made the right choice. And I just love how all these different characters, they're of different sizes, different races, different personalities. And it's a film that the stakes are high, and there's a lot of suspense, and there's a lot of thrills, but there really isn't a body count. Like, I remember clearly just one person who dies. And you know what? That's of course there's a body count. I mean, in the beginning there's the people who die in the submarine, but that's a pretty high body count. But I mean, what I mean is with the main characters, there's only one person that dies, which is refreshing. It really is. Now, speaking of characters, this film has a absolutely stellar cast. I mean, you got Ed Harris, who plays Virgil, Bud Brigman, the foreman of Deep Core, and the estranged husband of Lindsay. And Ed Harris is at the top of his game in this film, in this performance as Bud. This is, hands down, in my opinion, his best acting role, the best acting role that I've seen from him, anyway. And when you read and you see and you do some research and you figure out all of the shit that he dealt with while shooting this, it makes his performance even more impressive. This is a performance that deserved an Oscar nomination. I know the studio and the producers were pulling for Michael Biehn to have an Oscar nomination for his role as Coffee, and that's understandable. That's a great performance as well. But I personally think Ed Harris deserved an Oscar nomination for Best Actor, because there's a scene in this where he's reacting and he's emotionally distraught because he's having a hard time bringing his wife back to life, resuscitating her, and the performance in that is Oscar worthy. And when you find out that for a lot of the scene he was acting at nothing, he was acting at the air because the actress Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio was so pissed off at James Cameron's tactics on set, she just left. So Ed Harris is left here in this very emotional and powerful and very important scene for the whole film, and he's left there to act to the air, and he does it with just remarkable efficiency and knocks it out of the park. I mean, I know Ed himself doesn't like talking about The Abyss, and it's understandable because it was a horrible experience for him in terms of shooting the film. He almost died shooting the movie. He literally almost drowned. And that's a very traumatic thing for anybody, and including, not just an actor. I mean, anybody, period. So I can understand that. But it's still, to me, easily one of his best roles, if not his best role. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio is also equally as powerful and equally as effective and equally as... trying to think of the right word, because there's all these different words for good and great. I mean, she's equally as good as Ed Harris in terms of the performance. In terms of her performance in the film as Dr. Lindsay Brigman. This is also my favorite performance from her. I liked her in films like Class Action and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, but this character is like the character that she was born to play. And she really does fit this character like a glove. Michael Biehn is also great as Coffee, who is essentially becomes the villain of the film. You have J.C. Quinn, who plays Arliss, Sonny Dawson. You have Leo Burmester as Catfish DeVries. I liked him. Fun character, fun guy. He also likes to call himself the Hammer because his fist is a pretty strong fist, and he's knocked out a lot of people with it in his day. Kimberly Scott plays One Knight. Todd Graff plays Hippie Carnes, he's basically the comic relief. But he's a fun character. He's not annoying or anything. John Bedford Lloyd plays Jammer Willis. What I also like about this cast is there's a lot of people who aren't like super huge big stars. And there's not really any pretty boys either. So it's one of those films where you have a cast that's believable in this blue collar sort of way. Much like Leviathan, where you have these cast members who, they're not underwear models. They're not posing for Vogue magazine or for GQ. Like, these are all believable blue-collar type of actors and type of personalities and type of people. You also have Chris Elliott, who you might recognize from like CB4 and a few other films. He was also in SNL. He plays Bendix, who's just this kind of guy who's there on the surface. And there's a few other actors and actresses who play like the other Navy SEALs. George Robert Klek plays Willite. Christopher Murphy plays Shonik. And Adam Nelson plays Ensign Monk. And a few other people who play characters like reporters and sort of like this sort of a general guy who's the head of the operation. So there's different actors for different sort of extra roles or smaller roles in the film. But in a lot of ways, it's Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio's film. They are the ones that carry this movie. And they really do carry it on their shoulders, and they make it look effortless. It also features a score by Alan Silvestri. The only time that James Cameron really had a different composer working on a film that he did, other than James Horner or I'm trying to think of the other guy. So there's James Horner, and there's like another composer he uses a lot. But so this is the only film of Cameron's that Silvestri did the score for. And Silvestri has always been one of my favorite composers, and this score is no exception. It is really a stupendous score. It knows how to be foreboding and eerie, but it also knows how to be uplifting and epic and awe-inspiring, and emotional. It's a gorgeous score. It's a beautiful score. The choir that's used in certain scenes is really music to your ears. Just, it's one of those scores. It's like, it's hard to get better than this. It really is. I think Alan deserved an Oscar nomination for his score. I personally feel it was that good. It also has cinematography by Mikhail Solomon, and the cinematography in this is, I mean, it is superb. It really is. It works really well with James Cameron. A lot of the underwater shots are even more impressive because you have Mikhail Solomon doing the cinematography, and this is a guy who's very talented cinematographer, and he helps James Cameron get the most out of his shots. The editing by Conrad Buff IV and Joel Goodman and Howard E. Smith. That is also a something that's worth noting. It's a notable, very effective editing job. Certain sequences, especially the submarine chase and a few other things, are even more thrilling and exciting because of the editing. And the film cost about $70 million to make. Now, the budget on Wikipedia is saying $43 to $47 million, but really, I hear some other things, like I've heard in other places that it was $70 million, and it makes more sense that it's sort of closer to that. Maybe that's $43, $47 million adjusted to inflation, is more of $70 million, but it was easily one of the most expensive films to produce and to make at the time. And it came out, and it really didn't do that well. I mean, this was the first really big misstep for James Cameron. Let's think about this, folks. He had the Terminator. He had the Terminator. He had Aliens, and then those were pretty sizable hits, especially Aliens and the Terminator. And then The Abyss was his follow-up to Aliens and was highly anticipated. And it made a profit, but it didn't really do that well. It sunk in the box office. So, in large part, I think that's why a lot of people overlook The Abyss when it comes to James Cameron's career. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's really something that this film deserves, to be overlooked or to be drowned out by the other bigger, more successful films that he did. And like I said, I'm not taking anything away from the Terminator or Aliens or T2 or True Lies. I love those films too. I just love the underdog. Like, I'm kind of the guy who roots for the underdog, and the fact that I definitely do have some nostalgic connection with this film gives it a slight edge over those movies for me. And this is a film that James Cameron directed that I feel is impressive. It's as impressive as the other films he did, if not even more so in some ways, and I do feel that it definitely does deserve more recognition. It doesn't help when people can't buy it on Blu-ray, they can't watch it in high definition, so you don't really get to see the film the way that it's intended to be seen. So you're watching a movie, and it's this shitty, non-anamorphic widescreen transfer, and it's really letting the film down. It's letting the film down. It's letting the audience down. It's not presenting the prettiest picture. It's not giving the audience the best version of The Abyss that they should be getting. And I'm frustrated with James Cameron for wasting all of his time personally remastering this and True Lies, because you don't have the fucking time. You're too busy doing these 50 fucking Avatar sequels. You don't have time to do this. So pass it off to somebody else. If somebody else was involved with remastering The Abyss, it would have already been released on Blu-ray, and we wouldn't have to wait for Jimmy Cammey to get his work done or to do whatever the hell he wants with it. And if the transfer for T2 3D is any indication, I don't want him anywhere near this film to begin with, because the transfer for that is shit. The film is almost unrecognizable. It looks waxy as fuck. Excuse me for my tangent there. I just had to vent a little bit, because this movie is so awesome. It is such a spectacular science fiction film, and I'm not alone on that. This is on a lot of people's wish lists near the very top when it comes to Blu-rays, is The Abyss. There are people who keep checking Blu-ray.com, and people are on the forums, and they're all like, when is The Abyss Blu-ray coming out? And they're all ready and willing to buy it. But it just seems like things are just not working out. Just slowing down. Stuff isn't happening. Things are just remaining stagnant with it. And it's frustrating. It is. It's frustrating. As a fan of this film. And it's not like this movie is not critically acclaimed. This is a film that, while it might not have as much recognition, and it might not be as acclaimed by fans and other people as Terminator or Aliens or even True Lies, and definitely not as much as Titanic, it still has a pretty big fan base, and there's still a lot of people who really like this film, and a lot of critics who really liked the film even when it came out. So it's not like this is a film that has no accolades whatsoever and nobody who is giving it any kind of praise. So the fact that it was a box office flop or didn't make as much money as the studio wanted, that sucks. But at the same time, I don't think that means that it should not get the proper treatment on home video. I don't even know why they should have remastered it to begin with when it came out on DVD instead of giving you a Laserdisc rip. But okay, alright. Enough of that. I actually want to talk about the certain aspects of the film, certain parts of the movie that I wanted to mention. And then actually I'm going to read off some trivia, which I think is pretty interesting. Also, even though this is not in HD, I still do recommend this 2-disc special edition to people because of special features, especially the documentary Under Pressure, The Making of the Abyss. Really, really interesting, fascinating, and in-depth 1-hour-long documentary that is a must-see for fans of the film or even for people who are just interested in behind-the-scenes documentaries. Now, what I wanted to mention were specific sort of scenes and moments in the film that I thought were worth talking about briefly, because honestly, I don't really want to give away a lot. I think this is a film that I do really feel that it deserves to be discovered. It deserves to be... I really feel that people should dive right into it. And especially people who haven't seen it. And I don't want to give stuff away, and I don't want to do that, because I feel this is a very special, magical film and a one-of-a-kind experience for somebody who has never seen it before, and I don't want to ruin that. So, but I want to mention some moments, though. My favorite moments in this film are any time that the camera is underwater. I love it. It is like entering a whole nother world. And the fact that it's actually underwater and it's not in a set and it's not behind a green screen really does make it stand out in a good way. And I the moments in it that deal with the aliens, I think, are really well handled. I think the effects by Steve Johnson and company are absolutely amazing. They're awesome. I like the design. I like the design of aliens. I think it's unique. It definitely reminds me of some of these deep sea creatures and fish that have these different sort of bioluminescence inside of them. I love the scene with the water, the water sort of. Trying to think of the right word for it. It's kind of like a drone in a way. So the water drone that's made completely out of water and features some really high end for the time CGI effects, which I do feel still hold up. Even now, I mean, I think it looks better than some CGI that I've seen in 2017. The submarine chase with Coffee and Lindsay and Bud hanging on for dear life, that is a great, thrilling sequence. Expertly shot, edited. Everything about that scene is perfect. The scene right after that, when Bud and Lindsay have to swim out of the sub that's sinking back to the deep core, the benthic explorer. So they have to go back to it, and the whole will Lindsay survive sort of thing, the resuscitation scene, that gets me choked up every time I see it. Like the film, and speaking of that, the emotional aspect of this film is off the charts. Like, this is a movie that is very powerful, not only with its visuals and with its imagery, but with its emotions. Because it does a really, really good job making you care for these characters as if you knew them personally. And when you have the moment when Lindsay is there, laying on the ground like a dead fish, blue, completely blue, and Bud and everybody's trying to do everything they can to bring her back, and it doesn't seem like it's doing anything. It's like you just watched somebody die that you knew and you cared for. And when they bring her back, it is such it's such a wonderful emotion. And also the I love the idea of the liquid breathing, which actually apparently was actually real, which is even crazy. It's pretty crazy to think about. But yeah, the fluorocarbon stuff, that's actually legitimate. Like, that's some legit stuff that the Navy had. And the whole thing of where Bud has to dive deep down into the deepest depths, and it looks like he might not make it, but then he gets saved by the aliens and everything that you see. And I love the design of the alien spacecraft. And I like that the film has a nice sense of humor at times. There's some nice bits of levity with the characters, the repertoire, the back and forth between these characters, the rapport. The rapport. I mean, it's one of those things that it's like these actors really are best friends and have been working on this deep core underwater oil rig pretty much for years. And Michael Biehn is a terrifying villain, and he's a different type of villain. He's a guy who was doing his job. He's the head of this group of Navy SEALs. He gets the bends, and he loses his mind. And it's one of those villains that isn't necessarily 100% evil. This is a guy who's losing his mind. He's going crazy. And I like how the script really handled that. And I also like how the script showed that his fellow SEALs weren't just stereotypically bad guys either. I like how the script had them actually have a brain and have some sense about them, and realize that our leader, our captain here, he's gone bye-bye, and we're going to go along with things to make him feel comfortable, but we're going to make sure that he doesn't hurt anybody, or he doesn't hurt himself, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure the worst case scenario doesn't happen. Although it still kind of does, but they did their part and didn't just blindly follow him into the abyss, which was a welcome change of pace, because a lot of times when you have this type of subplot, you have the overzealous captain of the team, and then the other guys are equally as overzealous, so there's not a lot of realism there. And I thought this film did a great job being more realistic in its approach to these characters. And not only those characters, but to everybody. And into the entire film period. I mean, Cameron himself even said that he wanted to achieve some kind of gritty realism with this fantastical plot. And he really did a great job with that. He really did achieve that gritty realism. And that's what makes the film stand out from the rest of the pack for me versus some of the other films like it. It is this gritty sort of realism, this kind of throwback, this sort of blue-collar characters and approach that you saw in films like Alien, as well as in Leviathan that came out the same year. Now, yeah, those were all things that I wanted to mention about the film, about moments and special scenes that I thought were worth mentioning, things that I really liked. Hey there, it's trivia time! Normally I don't do a lot of stuff for this in these type of videos. I know this video is already going to be over 30 minutes. It's going to be even longer now with this. But I wanted to make an exception because The Abyss has a whole slew of really interesting, fascinating, fun bits of trivia. And it's only the tip of the surface when it comes to the trivia for this. These are a lot of stuff that's culled from different places. A lot of this stuff is actually taken from the making of documentary, which, once again, I cannot recommend enough. If you want to see some really great behind-the-scenes stuff, check out Under Pressure. But let's get started, shall we? With the trivia. The idea for the film came to James Cameron when he attended a science lecture about deep-sea diving in high school. He wrote a short story about a group of scientists in a laboratory at the bottom of the ocean. But a film about a group of scientists didn't seem commercial to him, so he changed it to a group of blue-collar workers instead. I think he made the right decision. According to James Cameron, he almost cast Jamie Lee Curtis as Lindsay Brigman, but Catherine Bigelow, his future wife, had already cast her in Blue Steel. Cameron would cast Curtis in True Lies a few years later. I'm glad he went with Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, because I felt that Mary really played that role perfectly. She is the right pick for that. She's a great actress when it comes to playing these no-nonsense, tough type of female characters. I don't really know if Jamie Lee Curtis could really pull that off. Although she did a decent job in Blue Steel, I'm just thinking, like, when it comes to most of their career, from what I've seen, Jamie Lee Curtis isn't really the type of actress who really pulls that role off. For example, in the film Virus, she's playing a similar sort of character, and it isn't really that believable, or it isn't really that effective. So I'm glad James went with Mary. Also, Mary is an actress that has a unique look to her, and she, like I said, she really did a perfect job playing this character who's strong, who's tough, who's no nonsense, but also has a sensitive side to her. And I don't know if Jamie Lee would have really been able to pull that off. But that's just my personal opinion. James Cameron's two choices for Bud Brigman and Ed Harris. Bud Brigman were Ed Harris. I don't know why I'm doing that. Apparently, like, my brain is in the abyss. My brain is drowning right now. His two choices for Bud Brigman were Ed Harris and Jeff Bridges. Once again, Ed Harris is a perfect choice for this role. Ed Harris personifies the blue-collar worker. Jeff Bridges, I think he would have been fine, but I don't really think he would have been as good as Ed. Ed is an everyman. Jeff Bridges is not really an everyman type of actor. Although he can pull that type of role off, he doesn't have the same vibe or the same look that Ed Harris provides. Mel Gibson was also considered for the role of Bud, and I can't see that at all. So I'm really glad that James Cameron went with Ed Harris, because it was a role that he was born to play, just like the role of Lindsay was a role that Mary was born to play. So the cast members also had to become certified divers before filming began. Most of the filming took place in a half-completed nuclear reactor facility in Gaffney, South Carolina, including the largest underwater set in the world at the time at 7 million gallons. It probably still is the largest underwater set. It's a lot of water. A lot of water. And just the craziness of it. They shot it in an abandoned, half-completed nuclear reactor facility. The tank was filled to a depth of 40 feet, but there was still too much light from the surface, so a giant tarp and billions of tiny black plastic beads were floated on the surface to block the light. During a violent storm, the tarp was destroyed by a lightning strike, which then shifted the production into nighttime, which makes this whole scary proposition of going underwater and shooting these scenes and potentially drowning even scarier, because you're doing it at night. The water in the two tanks was chlorinated heavily to prevent microbes from growing in it. This caused many of the actors' hair to become green and even white. Due to this, the crew must apply Vaseline to their hair and skin for protection while filming for several hours underwater. Some of their hair just got completely bleached white due to all the chlorine. So not only you got to deal with this, and this is uncomfortable, and you got to be underwater for long periods of time and act, you also got to deal with, Vaseline on your head and all this other craziness. And it gets crazier. It gets absolutely insane, folks. This is just touching the surface. This isn't even getting down to the depths of the craziness of the production of The Abyss. Very few scenes in the film involve stunt people. When Bud drags Lindsay back to the rig, that's really Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio holding her breath. When the rig is being flooded and the characters are running from water, drowning behind closed doors, and dodging exploding parts of the rig, those are all actors, not stunt people, which makes these sequences even more impressive. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I'll mention it now. Mary also deserved an Oscar nod for Best Supporting or Best Actress. I mean, her performance in this is also lights out. And when you look at stuff like that, where she actually held her breath underwater being dragged that by Ed Harris, that is some commitment right there. And that's a really, really impressive performance for any actress. Not just Mary. I mean, it's just one of those things where it's just like, wow, like you can't even believe that she took that risk, or any of these other actors took that risk, but they did. And it all paid off, because it adds to the realism of the film. During underwater filming, Ed Harris almost drowned. While filming a scene where he had to hold his own breath at the bottom of a submerged set, Harris ran out of air and gave the signal for oxygen. Harris's safety diver got hung up on a cable and could not get to him. Another crew member gave Harris a regulator, but it was upside down and caused him to suck in water. So shit went from worse to even worse, because it was like I'm drowning, I need air, and then here comes this diver, and he gives him air, but it's in wrong, so he's sucking in water. So a cameraman then came over. He ripped the upside down regulator out of Ed Harris's mouth and gave him the one in the correct orientation. And understandably, later that evening, Ed broke down and cried while he was driving home. He just had a breakdown. Understandably so, because he almost died. That is an extremely traumatic experience. And I feel for him. And Ed, you're a real trooper to put up with that, to go through that, and the whole liquid fluorocarbon stuff, and so on and so forth. It's one of those things where it's like, wow. That is somebody who's really dedicated to their craft, really dedicated to their performance, and is really willing to give their all. And that's a great actor. That's a sign of a one-of-a-kind actor. Also during filming, Ed Harris demanded cabbage as a snack, as he was on a strict diet. Now, this, however, became almost unbearable for him and the rest of the crew as he was constantly farting. In one underwater scene where Harris was in his diver suit, he farted, and the smell was so awful that he actually vomited inside the suit. The scene was obviously cut, and it took hours for Harris to resurface, clean the suit, submerge, and reshoot the scene. James Cameron was reportedly furious with Harris for this, and I understand why James would be pissed off over Harris's stinky cabbage farts. You know, because like this is already an expensive production. You're making this even more expensive with your farts. Okay, stop with the cabbage. Stop eating the cabbage. Stop stinking up the already uncomfortable situation that we're in. All right, everybody's uncomfortable. Everybody's miserable. Everybody is like, this sucks. We're underwater for hours. This is awful. I hate this. We do not need farts. We don't need rank cabbage farts to be added into this situation. So he's furious at Harris. He took action by placing air fresheners in all of the actors and crew members' suits to help ensure that there was no repeat of this incident. I love it. It's hilarious. Harris apparently also got pink eye during filming, and he had to wear contact lenses for a week. So Harris has just dealt with all this shit. He dealt with cabbage farts. He dealt with almost drowning. He dealt with pink eye. James Cameron also kept demanding retakes of the resuscitation scene, and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio was repeatedly getting her chest pounded on while soaking wet and half naked, and she just eventually broke, which is understandable, and she stormed off the set yelling, "We are not animals!" and wouldn't come back until Cameron agreed to wrap it already. Michael Biehn claimed that he was in South Carolina for 5 months and only acted for 3 to 4 weeks. He remembered one day being 10 meters underwater, and then suddenly the lights went out. It was so black I couldn't see my hand. I couldn't surface. I realized I might not get out of there. That is terrifying. That is absolutely horrifying. James Cameron nearly drowned during production when his diving suit malfunctioned while he was weighed down at the bottom of the giant water tank during filming. I'm pretty sure some actors, they probably had some sort of jokes around, you know, like, well, I'm almost wish maybe he did drown so we wouldn't have to deal with this shit anymore. The crew frequently spent enough time underwater to force them to undergo decompression before surfacing. James Cameron would often watch dailies through a glass window while decompressing and hanging upside down to relieve the stress on his shoulders from the weight of his helmet. During the rigorous and problematic shoot, the cast and crew began calling the film by various derogatory names such as The Son of Abyss, The Abuse, and Life's Abyss, and Then You Dive. I love that. It's great. I think they even had t-shirts that had like Life's Abyss, and Then You Dive, or Son of Abyss. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio said The Abyss was many things. Fun to make was not one of them. Definitely sounds like it. James Cameron declared this the worst production he was ever involved with, a sentiment shared by many of the cast members. The difficulties of filming around and underwater put a great strain on both the cast and crew, further complicated by Cameron's notorious perfectionism. Many of them have been quoted as saying they would never do a sequel or a movie like The Abyss again. And I can totally see why. Absolutely. Torturous production, but it's turned out phenomenal. It turned out great. So I want to give kudos to everybody who was involved with the production of this film, the cast, the crew, for putting up with Cameron's shit, and at the same time dealing with all of this craziness. I really got to give them the utmost amount of kudos for that, because that is something that is an achievement. It really is, for them to deal with all of this, to shoot underwater, to act, to do all this other stuff. I mean, Cameron even subjected his own brother to craziness. His own brother, Mike Cameron, was the guy who was in the submarine, and he was like the dead body who had like a crab crawl out of his mouth. That was his brother, who had to hold his breath underwater for multiple minutes, and while having a fucking crab crawl out of his mouth. So I mean, Cameron was really the equal opportunity offender when it comes to this kind of stuff. It was like, it doesn't matter if it's my brother. He's gonna get subjected to this bullshit too. Everybody's gonna deal with this. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about the film except it is a gorgeous, beautiful looking film when it comes to the visuals. Industrial Light and Magic, Steve Johnson, all these other effects guys banded together and really created a visual masterpiece of visual effects and special effects and practical effects and everything. The underwater photography is unbelievable. It is surreal, and there's nothing else like it. The direction by Cameron, even though he's a perfectionist and he was kind of an asshole on set, he made it work. Script is really good. The characters are really good. Both versions of this are definitely worth your time. Whether it's the theatrical cut, which I recommend to people who haven't seen the film, I recommend watching the theatrical cut first, because the theatrical cut gives you a sense of what the movie is like and whether or not it's your cup of tea. And if you want to see more and know a little bit more about it, or see different types, different versions of it, or to see if this story can go any further, then check out the special edition. Because it is definitely a longer version of the film. But it's equally it's also a great film, the special edition. I just think the theatrical cut's a little bit better because of the pacing, and I like the fact that it isn't as preachy with its final message as the special edition is. Other than that, all I can say about The Abyss is I would also recommend, if you're a fan of the film, or if you're just a fan of books, period, to search for and to seek out the novelization of the film by Orson Scott Card, because it gives you so much more information on the characters in terms of their backstories, and it's almost like reading about a whole different film. It really is, because there's a lot of behind the scenes. There's not really a lot of behind the scenes stuff, but there's a lot of backstory and character development that is not in the film, in either version of the film. And yeah, I got nothing else to add except this is definitely, in my opinion, an underrated, unbelievably amazing, spectacular science fiction epic that deserves more recognition, needs to be on Blu-ray, remastered in 2K or 4K, both editions of it on the Blu-ray. And it's a film that I feel has held up really well over the years, and I really do feel it's a one of a kind experience that I recommend everybody experiencing at least once.